Welcome students. Today we are going to see about the second prose, The Night the Ghost Got In, written by James Grover Thurber. So first let's see about the author. James Grover Thurber. He was born on 1894 and died on 1961. He was an American cartoonist, author, humorist, journalist, playwright, and celebrated wit. The meaning of wit is wisdom, intelligence. So he was very intelligent. He was best known for his cartoons and short stories published mainly in the New Yorker magazine, such as The Catbird Seat, and collected in his numerous books. He was one of the most popular humorists of his time, as he celebrated the comic frustrations and eccentricities of ordinary people. Eccentricities, that is abnormal or strange. So most of his humorous stories were taken from the society he lived. Let's see the glossary of this lesson first. Hullabaloo. Lot of loud noise made by people who are excited. Patrolman, a patrolling police officer. Attic, a space or room inside or partly inside the roof of a building. So below the roof, a small space or room. Slamming, shutting a door or window forcefully and loudly. Gruffly, sadly. Intuitively, without conscious reasoning, or instinctively, that is naturally, automatically, spontaneously. And vamped, struck something forcefully. Beveled, reduced to a sloping edge, that is a square edge on an object. Rending, tearing to pieces. Yonked, pulled with a jerk. Zither, a musical instrument. I'll show that musical instrument, it's given here. So this is zither. And guinea pig, a domesticated tailless South American rodent originally raised for food. This animal is nowadays used as a pet, and also it is used for laboratory research. Hysterical, affected by wildly uncontrolled emotion. Creaking, making a squeaking sound when being moved. Indignant, feeling or showing anger or annoyance at what is perceived as unfair treatment. Holster, a holder made of leather for carrying handgun. Rafter, a beam forming part of the internal framework of a roof. So below the roof, there will be beams. Deserter, a person who leaves the armed force without permission. Now let's get into the lesson. The night the ghost got in. Imagination of odd things always leads to absolute humor. Read the lesson and enjoy the narrator's experience with his grandfather, who creates chaos and laughter with his imaginative stories. Chaos is confusion. This story clearly tells that too much of imagination will mislead the complete situation. This story also provokes all elements of a horror drama. The ghost that got into our house on the night of November 17th, 1915, raised such a hullabaloo of misunderstandings that I am sorry I didn't just let it keep on walking and go to bed. The narrator misunderstood that a ghost entered his house on November 17th, 1915, and raised such a hullabaloo. Hullabaloo is, a loud noise. And finally, he felt sorry for what happened there because of his misunderstandings. Its advent caused my mother to throw a shoe through a window of the house next door and ended up with my grandfather shooting a patrolman. So its advent, the ghost's advent is arrival, caused his mother, the narrator's mother, to throw a shoe through a window of the next door, the nearby house. And finally it ended up with his grandfather shooting a patrolman, a policeman. I'm sorry, therefore, as I have said, that I ever paid any attention to the footsteps. And again, he was feeling sorry that he must not have paid any attention to the footsteps which created commotion, that is confusion. They began about 1:15 in the morning. A rhythmic, quick, cadenced walking around the dining room table. The time was 1:15 a.m. in the morning. And at that time, the narrator heard a rhythmic walk, a walking sound around the dining room table. My mother was asleep in one room upstairs, my brother Herman in another. Grandfather was in the attic, in the old walnut bed which, as you will remember, once fell on my father. So his mother was sleeping in one room, and his brother Herman, he was sleeping in another room, and his grandfather, he was in the attic. Attic is, a space or room partly inside the roof, below the roof. And his grandfather, he was sleeping in the old walnut bed, the bed which was made of walnut wood. As you will remember, once fell on my father. So the bed was once fell on his father. I had just stepped out of the bathtub and was busily rubbing myself with a towel when I heard the steps. So what the narrator was doing when he heard the noise, he just he was busily rubbing himself with a towel because he just took a shower. And what's the meaning of bathtub? It's a pool like thing, for taking bath. They were the steps of a man walking rapidly around the dining table downstairs. So at that time he heard a strange sound, someone walking around the dining table downstairs. The light from the bathroom shone down the back steps which dropped directly into the dining room. I could see the faint shine of plates on the plate rail. I couldn't see the table. So the dining table was dark, and with the light of the bathrooms, he was able to see the dining room, but it was not that clear. He could see the faint shine of the plates on the plate rail. Plate rail is, a shelf for holding plates, but he was not able to see the table. The steps kept going round and round the table. So he was, continuously hearing the sound of the footsteps. At regular intervals, a board creaked when it was trod upon. At regular intervals, a board creaked. At regular intervals, he heard a high-pitched sound when it was trod upon. Trod means when someone was walked upon. I supposed at first that it was my father or my brother Roy who had gone to Indianapolis, that is, a city, but were expected home at any time. So first he was suspected that it must be his father or brother. I suspected next that it was a burglar. Burglar is, thief or robber. It did not enter my mind until later that it was a ghost. But it was not his father, a brother, or a burglar. Finally, he decided that it was a ghost. After the walking had gone on for perhaps 3 minutes, I tiptoed to Herman's room. After the walking sound had gone, the narrator tiptoed to Herman's room. Tiptoed, that is walking very carefully and quietly with one's heels raised. Psst, I hissed in the dark, shaking him. So he was sleeping and he was, the narrator was shaking him. Up, he said in the low, hopeless tone of a despondent beagle. So the narrator, he gave a hopeless tone. Here the narrator compares Herman's sound to a despondent beagle. Beagle is a dog, a small hunt dog. Despondent is disheartened. He always half suspected that something would get him in the night. So his brother Herman, he was always afraid or suspected that something would get him in the night. I told him who I was. So he was a bit confused and scared. So the narrator explained him who he was. There's something downstairs, I said. He got up and followed me to the head of the back staircase. The steps had ceased. Ceased means came to an end. So they came out and looked downstairs. Nothing was there. They couldn't find anything there. Herman looked at me in some alarm. Alarm means, fear or nervousness. I had only the bath towel around my waist. He wanted to go back to bed. I gripped his arm. So nothing was there. As nothing was there, he decided to go back to his bed. Herman decided to go back to his bed. But the narrator gripped his arm. Gripped is, holding or grasping. There's something down there, I said. Instantly, the steps began again, circled the dining room table like a man running, and started up the stairs towards us heavily, 2 at a time. 2 steps at a time. 2 at a time means 2 steps at a time. They heard the footsteps circling the dining room table like a man running, and it started up the stairs towards them. The light still shone palely down the stairs. We saw nothing coming. We only heard the steps. As it was dim, they couldn't see anything coming towards them, but they could hear the footsteps. So they were dumbstruck. Herman rushed to his room and slammed the door. Shut the door. I slammed shut the door at the stairs top and held my knee against it. The narrator, he also slammed the door and held his knee against it. After a long minute, I slowly opened it again. There was nothing there. So they couldn't hear any sound for a long time. So he just opened the door again. There was nothing there. There was no sound. None of us ever heard the ghost again. The slamming of the doors had aroused mother. So their mother woke up by hearing the slamming sound. She peered out of her room. She looked out of her room. "What on earth are you boys doing?" she demanded. She questioned the boys. "What you boys are doing here?" Herman ventured out of his room. He pretended that he was not afraid of anything. "Nothing," he said gruffly. Gruffly is sadly. But he was in color a light green. But actually he had become pale out of nervousness. "What was all that running around downstairs?" said mother. So she too had heard some noise. So she had heard the steps too. "We just looked at her." "Burglars," she shouted intuitively, that is instinctively. I tried to quieten her by starting lightly downstairs. So the narrator tried to quieten her. Simultaneously, he started moving towards the downstairs. "Come on, Herman," I said. So Herman said, "I'll stay with mother because she is all excited." I stepped back onto the landing. So landing is it's a small platform that is in the staircase. "Don't either of you go a step," said mother. So she said not to move anyway. "We'll call the police." Since the phone was downstairs, I didn't see how we were going to call the police, nor did I want the police. But mother made one of her quick, incomparable decisions. So the phone was downstairs and they were all upstairs. So now mother quickly she made a decision. She flung up a window of her bedroom. She just quickly opened a window of her bedroom which faced the bedroom windows of the neighbor's house. And then she picked up a shoe and whammed it through a pane of glass across the narrator's space that separated the two houses. Whammed. Whammed is throwing forcefully. She threw a shoe through a a single sheet of glass across the narrow space that separated the two houses. Glass tinkled into the bedroom occupied by a retired engraver named Bodwell and his wife. Bodwell had been for some years in rather a bad way and was subject to mild attacks. Almost everybody we knew or lived near had some kind of attacks. With a tinkling glass sound, the shoe fell into the bedroom of the neighbor named Bodwell. He was a retired engraver. Engraver is someone who cuts designs on metal, glass or wood. He lived with his wife there. They were so angry because their relationship was not that good. They had some bad times before. So here the narrator says usually the neighbors will be having some kind of attacks, as everybody knows. Attacks is rebuke, find fault with. It was now about 2 o'clock of a moonless night. Clouds hung black and low. Bodwell was at the window in a minute, shouting, frothing a little. Frothing, saliva. He was so angry, so he was shouting, shaking his fist. Fist is a person's hand when the fingers are folded towards the palm and held tightly. We'll sell the house and go back to Peoria. Peoria is a place in United States. We could hear Mrs. Bodwell saying. So Mrs. Bodwell, she too was so angry and she said, "Let's go to our native place itself." It was some time before mother got through to Bodwell. Burglars, she shouted. Burglars in the house. Herman and I hadn't dared to tell her that it was not burglars but ghosts, for she was even more afraid of ghosts than of burglars. But mother started shouting as burglars. And the Herman and the narrator, they were not dare enough to say her that it was not a burglar, but it was a ghost, because she was very much afraid of a ghost than of burglars. Bodwell at first thought that she meant there were burglars in his house, but finally he quietened down and called the police for us over an extension phone by his bed. So the neighbor Bodwell, he understood the situation and he decided to call the police. After he had disappeared from the window, mother suddenly made as if to throw another shoe, not because there was further need of it, but as she later explained, because the thrill of heaving is throwing, a shoe through a window glass had enormously taken her fancy. I prevented her. Now, mother, she was thrilled of throwing the shoe to the neighbor's house. So she took another shoe. She pretended to throw the shoe, but the narrator, he just prevented her not to do that. The police were on hand in a commendably short time. They came very fast. A Ford sedan, full of them. A Ford sedan is a car, and the car full of policemen came. Two on motorcycles, and a patrol wagon. Wagon is a truck-like vehicle, which about 8 in it. And in the truck, in the wagon, 8 policemen came, and a few reporters also came with them. They began banging at our front door. So they started knocking their front door. Flashlights shot streaks of gleam up and down the walls, across the yard, down the walk between our house and Bodwell's. So they brought flashlights, and the streaks means the lines or the strokes of gleam. Gleam is glitter. Up and down the walls. So everywhere they watched, they saw with the flashlight. Open up, cried a hoarse voice, very rough voice. They were shouting to open the door. We are men from headquarters. I wanted to go down and let them in. So the narrator wanted to go down and let them in, since there they were. But mother wouldn't hear of it. She didn't allow him to go. You haven't a stitch on. So she was commenting on his dress. She pointed out, you would catch your death. So if you go there, you will die. I want the towel around me again. Finally, the cops put their shoulders to our big, heavy front door with its thick beveled, here it is a thick glass. This will be used for larger windows and doors, and broke it in. So they broke the door, which is made of glass, beveled glass, and they entered. I could hear a rending of wood. Rending is breaking or tearing to pieces, and a splash of glass. They broke the door on, and they entered. Splash of glass on the floor of the hall. Their lights played all over the living room and crisscrossed nervously in the dining room, stabbed into hallways, shot up the front stairs, and finally up the back. So everywhere they were searching with the flashlights. They were searching the burglars. They caught me standing in my towel at the top. A heavy policeman bounded up the steps, So he came towards the steps. "Who are you?" he demanded. "I live here," I said. The officer in charge reported to mother, "No sign of nobody, lady." So, no sign of anybody, lady, he said. Must have got away. So, they must have got away. What was he like? There were, so the mother was replying the police, there were 2 or 3 of them, mother said, whooping and carrying on, slamming doors. Whooping is, they was just screaming and slamming the doors. Funny, said the cop. All the windows and door was locked on the inside tight as a ticker. So we have checked all the doors and the windows. All the doors were locked inside tight. So nobody can enter. Downstairs, we could hear the trumping of the other police. Trumping is walk heavily. Police were all over the place. Doors were yanked open. Drawers were yanked open. So yanked is pulled with a jerk. Windows were shot up and pulled down. Furniture fell with dull thumps, that is, upside down. A half-dozen policemen emerged out of the darkness of the front hallway upstairs. They began to ransack is damaged, the floor, pulled beds away from walls, tore clothes off hooks in the cupboards, pulled suitcase and boxes off shelves. So they pulled all the clothes outside the cupboards and they started damaging the house in order to search something up. Here they are searching the burglar. One of them found an old zither, that is a musical instrument, it's given here, that Roy had won in a pool tournament. So Roy is his brother. He was his brother. And look you here, Joe, he said, strumming it with a big paw. So the police man, took the zither and he started playing it with his hand. The cop named Joe took it and turned it over. What is it? He asked me. It's an old zither, a guinea pig used to sleep on, I said. Guinea pig, it's a rat-like pet animal. It was true that a pet guinea pig we once had would never sleep anywhere except on the zither. But I should never have said so. Joe and the other cop looked at me a long time. They put the zither back on a shelf. The cops said that nobody was there and they suspected that the lady must be hysterical. Hysterical is mad. After that, they heard a creaking noise in the attic. That noise was made by the grandfather. He was turning over in bed, so that they heard that creaking sound. What's that? Snapped Joe. Asked Joe. Immediately, 5 or 6 cops went to the attic before the narrator could intervene. Intervene is interfere. The narrator realized that it would be bad if the cops entered the attic. The policeman came to the attic and saw the narrator's grandfather there. The grandfather believed that he was still in the war. His grandfather was going through a phase, a period in which he believed that he was still in the American Civil War between General Meade and Stonewall Jackson. Grandfather came to the conclusion that the police were deserters. Meaning of deserters, persons who have escaped from somewhere. So the grandfather came to the conclusion that the police were deserters from Meade's army, and he thought that they have come to hide themselves in his attic. He bounded out, he jumped out of his bed wearing a long flannel. Flannel is a fabric, woolen fabric. So the grandfather was wearing a long flannel nightgown over long woolen pants. He wore a nightcap and a leather jacket around his chest. On seeing the grandfather in that attire, the cops must have realized that the indignant white-haired old man belonged to that house, but the grandfather didn't allow them to talk. Indignant is angry. But the grandfather didn't allow them to talk. He started shouting at them. "Back, you cowardly dog," roared grandfather. "Back to the lines, you good man, lily-livered cattle." Lily-livered, it's shivered cattle. With that, he fetched the officer who found the zither. He caught the officer who found the zither. The grandfather smacked his head. That sent him sprawling. Smacked is hit his head. That sent him sprawling. Sprawling is lying down with one's arms and legs spread out. The others started running. Grandfather immediately grabbed the gun from the police who was lying down, and he started shooting. And he cracked the rafter, and the smoke filled the attic. In that confusion, a cop was shot in his hand. Somehow, they came downstairs and locked the door against the old man. Again, the old man fired once or twice, and then he went to bed. Then the narrator explained Joe why his grandfather behaved like that. The police hesitated. Reluctant is hesitate. The police hesitated to leave without arresting anyone there. It was a defeat for them. The police didn't like the layout. Something looked funny. Funny is fake. Something was not real. So they began to search. So they began to search into things again. At that time, a reporter came up to the narrator. The narrator was wearing one of his mother's dress, as he couldn't find his dress. The reporter was confused by looking his dress. The reporter asked the narrator what the problem was. The narrator said the truth that it was a ghost. He looked at the narrator for a long time as if he were a sloth. Sloth is a machine selling small items. See, if we drop coin in a slot and if there is no result, how our look will be? The same look the reporter gave towards the narrator. And he walked away. The cops followed him. The policeman, one who was shot by the grandfather, he was with a bandaged arm. He started scolding and cursing God, blaspheming, that is, scolding God. The zither cop's gun was with the old man. So the cop wanted to get that back. The narrator promised them that he will bring the gun to the station the next day. After everyone has gone, the mother asked what happened to that one policeman. The narrator said that the grandfather shot him. What for? She asked. The narrator told her that he was a deserter. A deserter is escapee. Of all things, he was such a nice looking young man, said mother. So the next day, the grandfather was fresh as a daisy flower, and full of jokes at breakfast the next morning. We thought at first he had forgotten all about what had happened, but he hadn't. Over his third cup of coffee, he glared at Herman and me. Stared in an angry way. What was the idea of all them cops tearing, hooting around the house last night? What happened yesterday? Why the cops were waiting and calling around the house last night? He demanded. Tearing, hooting is waiting and calling. No one kept water bottle beside my bed. How difficult it was for me to look for water in the dining room last night. So everyone understood that it was not a burglar or a ghost. Indeed, it was the grandfather. The narrator mistook his grandfather walking in the dark for a burglar and then a ghost. Their imagination rewarded them a sleepless night. So the moral is, misunderstanding always leads to chaos. Thank you, students.